Readers, I'm wondering if you've ever had this experience. I was watching the third Harry Potter movie again the other night. It's one of my favorite movies, so I've seen it a lot. And there was this part that came up, and even though I've seen it so many times, this time it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I was watching the scene where Harry creates the charm to fight off the Dementors, and while I watched this time, I suddenly realized something. I think that the author and the filmmaker were using the dark atmosphere and the scary music to show how frightening the situation was, and how strong Harry had to be to create that charm. It wasn't just regular magic, he had to be brave and strong to use it. Thinking this totally changed how I saw that part of the movie, and also how I thought about the authors and filmmakers' work. This made me think two things. First, when I read, the same thing happens that authors seem to use atmosphere and setting to reveal a character's inner qualities. But more importantly, I started to realize that I get my best ideas about an author's techniques and reasons when I reread and rethink, not when I read the first time. Today, I want to teach you that when you think about an author's techniques and goals, it helps to reread, and it really helps to be ready to revise your own first thinking too. Let's try this out. I'll read a part we know well. We'll be thinking about goals and techniques. Then we're going to revise our first thinking to see if we can make it better. Watch me try this so you can try it next. Here's the part we've looked at a lot, where the narrator is looking on Google to figure out how to get to the Mooney Gym. I'm going to reread, trying to make those claims like we did yesterday. Proceed instead to the local library and look up Mooney Gym online. Type the address into Google Earth and you'll discover it's right next to the Air and Space Museum your moms took you and your sis to back in the day. And the Air and Space Museum, if your calculations are correct, isn't but 5 miles from your pop's job at the factory. So, what did he do and why? Well, we've noticed a lot of techniques here. One of them was that step by step, bit by bit inner thinking. Matt De La Pena used step by step inner thinking to, well, I guess it was to communicate that the narrator is determined. One tip, it also helps to use words like I think maybe and perhaps as I reread and think. So I could try that out. Perhaps Matt is using this inner thinking to communicate that the narrator is determined and tough. Or maybe he wants to show us instead of telling us what kind of person the narrator is. But now I want to not just reread, but also revise my thinking. That means pushing myself beyond my first answer to try new ideas. One way to do that is to get more specific. Why did he do it this way? After all, Matt could have used other ways to communicate that the narrator is determined, right? I think maybe Matt is showing us the narrator's thinking because it sounds so real, like a real teenager would think. Otherwise, he would be too good to be true, like a character in a fairy tale. Like the first time I read this, when he's thinking that he can just walk the 5 miles, I thought, oh, he's tough and determined. He's like the perfect basketball player, willing to do anything to get better. In some ways, he might even be too perfect. What teenager, even a basketball player, would be willing to wake up at 4:30 and then walk 5 miles to get to a particular gym? But when I reread it and got more into the narrator's inner thinking, I started to think that maybe Matt is making the narrator seem not so perfect by having the way he talks be more believable. His voice sounds so real, thinking bit by bit, talking in realistic ways using slang, that I'm willing to believe he's a real teenager and not a too good to be true kind of character. Readers, do you see how I did this? I went back to the part to reread and thought about the goals and techniques that the author used, but then I pushed myself to revise my thinking to get to a second, more thoughtful idea. Are you ready to give this a try? Think about this in your own books. Yesterday, you had some time to start thinking about goals and techniques. Right now, I want you to find a part of your book where you jotted down a goal and technique claim. If you haven't found a place in your book yet, go ahead and pause the video to do that first. Then, I want you to try rereading and revising your initial thinking. Remember the tips that I shared. You can try using language like perhaps or I think maybe to push yourself to try a new idea. And you can try asking yourself why the author used one particular technique instead of another one. Go ahead and give it a try. Readers, remember the goal is to come to some new thinking. Your biggest job today is to keep going. You've got a fantastic start, thoughtful work analyzing the techniques in your author's repertoire and just recently adding on to the new thinking of why those techniques might be used. Now, you want to push yourself to keep going, deepening and revising your thinking, but also getting a lot of reading and thinking done. And that deepening, that rethinking, is work you'll want to do every single time you read. What reading